So that's the kind of key implications, I guess, practical implications for administrators. Moving on to sort of the advisory firms and the investors. On the advisory firm side, one of the big kind of streams of work for us is to deal with the kind of legal and contractual and fund documentation changes that we expect to arise from AIFMD. And again, obviously that's most hardest felt in terms of July next year on the European managers of European funds. But if a manager has got responsibility for valuation and all the added responsibilities that we've talked about already, they will probably want that to be reflected perhaps in some of the offering documents of the fund. In terms of the responsibility for valuation, if fund administrators are calculating the NAV, it's possible there will seek to be some arrangement, tri-party arrangement with the administrator and the manager. Right now, in the typical legal kind of corporate fund structure, the relationships are separate and to the fund directly. So I think, and obviously a depository in terms of its liabilities is going to reconstitute its legal agreements to make sure that its responsibilities are correctly disclosed. So I think we see a lot of changes to all the constituent documents, and that the prospectus and potentially the application forms will need a review. I suppose this is probably an area where the earlier point or the introductory point around the delay in the regulations is going to be a bit of a challenge, because we probably do need the final regulations to kind of finalise those agreements, and obviously the regs are coming through in July next year. So a bit of a rump of work there to be done. But I guess the legal or advisory firms will no doubt already be working on that. And then obviously at the centre of this, all the investors. So what's the impact for the investors? I think on the positive side of AIFMD, particularly given with the passport, AIFMD brings European investors the opportunity to transact in funds that can or will be sold all across Europe. So on that basis, you could see a scenario where there's economies of scale, because those funds could be widely sold and assets raised. And obviously some investors may be looking for the regulatory badge of an AIFMD fund. So depending on the type of investor, depending on the risk appetite, all of those things may be good for investors. I guess equally on the other side, what we tend to hear from a lot of managers is that they don't currently at least see a huge demand for that type of offering, and that basically they see themselves continuing more with the offshore structures, primarily because it's naturally going to be lower cost. So I think you can sort of flip the coin on both sides. For the investors, it may be good for some, or just may not be of any interest for others. But like anything else, everybody has different perspectives. So that was to try and very quickly summarise. I don't know how quickly that took in the end. What are the practical implications? Certainly as we see them, and as I say, I realise it's kind of scratching the surface. But maybe we just open the floor to questions.
Hi, I'm Alistair, Integra Advisory. We're a fund manager. For funds in existence, hedge funds in existence, come July 2013, this existing structure needs to change to be compliant with the directive, or funds already in existence can continue the way they are?
Okay, so the obligation is on the fund manager, so in terms of rather than the fund, so everything kind of orientates off the fund manager responsibility. And it's a very good question, because it's one that we debate internally. Our understanding is that there is for an existing manager, there's a 12-month period from July 2013 by which to get authorised, and therefore that authorisation date will be the date that the compliance obligations start. But I'm not sure that's entirely clear, and I couldn't answer that question, particularly as I'm not a lawyer. But I think it's my understanding is that's certainly the intent. I'm not sure if that's totally clear. I'd defer to the lawyers. You might pitch that one to the next panel if there's something those lawyers there. So, but I think the intent is, if I understand it correctly, the intent is that it would be by July 2014, you need to be authorised, and then the obligations fall in.
Lino Calleja from Cassidy, Bank of Valletta. I believe, though, there is also a limit with regards to the amount for the fund managers that they have under management, for which the AIFM applies.
Correct. So there is a threshold or the minimum limit before you actually kind of cut in at AIFMD.
I believe that is in the region of 100 billion.
I think so. Yes, that's my understanding.
What if you have a non-EU fund manager who is managing an EU-registered fund?
Okay.
But that fund is marketed to persons outside the EU. Will it fall under the AIFM?
My understanding of that is if you're a non-EU fund manager operating a non-EU fund...
But I think an EU fund.
Sorry, an EU fund rather. Sorry, if you're... Yes. So I think the expectation is going to be cooperation agreements between Europe and the non-EU fund manager's jurisdiction. And with that, so assuming that's in place by July next year, then that would be the obligation on that manager is to reporting to regulators, because they're trying to obviously dimension any systematic risk that fund managers may present. To your point around if they don't have any European investors, I'm not aware that there's a carve out for that. And I guess if you're used, I mean, my logical kind of thought process on that will be if it's a European fund, the regulators will be taking interest in it.
Is the threshold that is referred to, is this collective or per fund?
On the
manager?
It's on the manager. It's on the manager, and there's very specific rules as to how you calculate your assets under management. That would need to take a very close look. I know in the case of Dodd-Frank, how that was calculated, there was some element, I think, of kind of counting to the long side of the book only, which therefore meant that on a net asset basis, you may look like you're under the threshold. On the actual regulatory basis, you might be over. So I haven't gone right down into the directive to look at the real detail of that. Obviously, we have people doing that, but it's not necessarily going to be what you see as a NAV on your fund. It's going to be the regulatory calculation that you have to undertake.
We've got time for one more question, and this is one that's coming from the live stream.
So the question is, can an EU fund with an EU fund manager of less than $100 million still get the passport? And if it does not fail, if it does not fall into the AIFMD, so can he get an EU fund with an EU fund manager of less than $100 million, still get the passport if it doesn't fall under the AIFM?
Again, I'm not a lawyer, but my sense would be...
That's one for Andre then.
Exactly, maybe hold it over for Andre, but I think you need to be, as I understand, you need to be authorised to get the passport. So I don't, but I'm not, I wouldn't. I think you need to be authorised to get the passport is the way I understand it. But
if you're under the threshold, you can opt in and then be authorised and then passport. Obviously, if you're under the threshold and you don't opt in, you cannot passport.
Yeah.